I'm Graham Brady. I'm Deputy Chairman of the Centre for Policy Studies, which doesn't normally take a huge amount of my time, because normally we have the wonderful Maurice Sarchi, our Chairman, to introduce events like this. He is instead enlightening the House of Lords with his views this evening, so you've got me. But I'm delighted to be here for this important event, delighted to see so many of Keith Joseph's family here. Probably you all know the history of the Centre for Policy Studies, going back to 1975, when it was established by Keith Joseph and Margaret Thatcher to come up with the platform of ideas to make sure that a Conservative government could succeed and win, and make our country succeed and win again. And it sort of feels at the moment as though we're needed again. And we've just, as a Centre for Policy Studies, had a great piece of news in some polling evidence that's been produced, which shows that we are very much topping the tables of influential think tanks on the right and centre-right in British politics. Even better, our influence was shown to have fallen amongst Labour MPs. And I think that's because they now all know who we are. And so they've stopped listening to us. But this wonderful event, we've had some illustrious memorial lecturers over the years. Last year, Matt Ridley was brilliant, Matt Hancock, the year before, John Howard, the wonderful former Prime Minister of Australia. There was a bit of a hiccup, and it was me in 2014. But tonight, we have an absolute treat in store for us in Allister Heath, from the editor of the Sunday Telegraph now, but many of us remember Allister from many years ago when he was making waves running the City AM newspaper, which was always a treat to encounter at Tube Station, because you would actually find some proper views and some arguments for free markets and friends of rights and all those things that we believe in. And we're looking forward to hearing more of that from you now, Allister. Thank you very much.
Thanks for that kind introduction, Sir Graham, and thank you, my lords, ladies and gentlemen, for taking the trouble to come tonight to listen to me. It's a great honour to have been invited by the Centre for Policy Studies to deliver the Sir Keith Joseph Memorial Lecture here at the Carlton Club, and I'm grateful to Lord Sarchi and Robert Coburn for inviting me. I'm honoured the members of the Joseph family are here tonight. As somebody who wasn't politically aware and didn't even live in this country during Lord Joseph's time in active politics, I first understood his significance in the early 1990s, reading a wonderful book by Richard Cockett called Thinking the Unthinkable. He chronicled how a small group of economists and politicians and political entrepreneurs defeated socialism and paved the way for the free market revolution that saved this country from bankruptcy. The Centre for Policy Studies, founded by Lord Joseph, Sir Alfred Sherman and Margaret Thatcher, was at the heart of this fight. A few years later, in 1999, exactly 20 years ago, when I was still a postgraduate student, Matthew Elliott, who since went on inter alia to be the CEO of Oak, gave me a copy of Keith Joseph, a single line, the biography by Morrison Hallcrow, a former deputy editor of the Daily Telegraph, which tells us two things: that the world is quite a small place, and that everything is connected to everything else. I'm sure Matthew's long since forgotten, but the book remains displayed prominently on my bookshelf. Joseph's accomplishments, which were immense, are best summarised by the fact that the first volume of Lady Thatcher's biography is dedicated to him. It reads simply, "I could not have become leader of the opposition or achieved what I did as Prime Minister without Keith." And coming from her, it was the highest possible praise. As one gets older, one no longer believes automatically in perpetual progress. The optimism of my youth, the belief that bad ideas had been eradicated forever, was hopelessly misplaced, it turns out. Progress is at the very least fragile. Imperfect human beings will always have a tendency to revert to their worst tendencies or to embrace flawed ideologies. Naively, for example, I genuinely didn't believe that the monstrous bigotry that is anti-Semitism could make such a comeback and in fact a party, Jeremy Corbyn's Labour, which could theoretically be in government in a few weeks' time. My elders and betters warned me, but I dismissed them. I was wrong and foolish. Joseph's father, Samuel, one of the great entrepreneurs behind the Bovis construction giant, and who also served as Lord Mayor of the City of London, faced plenty of anti-Semitism in his time, as did Heath at his prep school as well as subsequently. It felt perhaps that the world's oldest hatred had been stamped out by the late 1980s and early 1990s in this country at least, but we now know that this wasn't to be. Yes, it's true, science continues to progress. We have the internet and wonderful new medical technologies to tackle HIV, increasingly cancer and hopefully in time Alzheimer's and Parkinson's. There's a website from the Cato Institute called Human Progress that chronicles the material progress that we continue to make. We are living longer, how war and violence are on average dramatically down globally by historic standards, how the spread of capitalism has triggered the greatest poverty reduction era in human history, how billions of people have joined the consumer society and live better, longer and hopefully happier lives. Yet, despite the tragic, despicable return of some forms of ancient prejudices in countries such as Britain, you also have massive progress when it comes to the rights of minorities in the West. They've been improved beyond recognition, as have those of women in a massive shift. You have gay marriage, for example, which is becoming universal across the West. Huge progress. Globalization, in the sense of easy international communications, is here to stay. All of these improvements are true and hugely welcome. Yet the foundations of our prosperity, of our freedoms, of our liberalism in the classical sense, are under threat, in a way that those who focus simply on broad brush outcomes often don't notice. The edifice is rotting because many of the assumptions underlying its foundations are once again being questioned. And the aim of my lecture today is therefore to address what I believe to be the greatest challenge facing us today, and no, that's not Brexit, despite this week's events. Brexit is hugely important, and the need to return to accountable democratic self-governance is crucial, but it's merely a subset of a much greater question. The central issue is that the Western world is falling out of love with capitalism and with a free society. Joseph's work is being undone. It is vital to understand why this is happening and to work out how to fight back, and that is my twin task tonight. So the first part of my lecture will be quite downbeat, and I apologise for that. I'm going to list, perhaps too exhaustively, all of the reasons for the turning of the tide against free markets and the free liberal democratic society. It's going to be painful. The second part of this lecture, I hope, will be a little more constructive. I believe that there's cause for optimism, that my side and Lord Joseph's side can still in time win this battle. But it will be tough. The situation is far worse than many people understand. Real progress is derived from three factors. First, humanity's adoption of an economic system based around private property, markets, the free setting of prices, sound money, contracts, self-ownership, a system we could call free market capitalism. Second, the concomitant rise of individual freedom, which is based on the idea that all people are equal under the law, that we all have the right to do as we please with our property, that without liberty, true virtue and morality are impossible, that we should be treated like unique individuals, personally accountable for our actions. And three, the emergence of a form of liberal, constitutional, law-bound democracy to make sure that there is consent for collective decisions, that we don't have to rely on theologians to guard themselves, and to ensure that political power is transferred peacefully. All three of these forces for progress are tragically under threat, and that is what I'm going to be talking about tonight. So what's gone wrong? What are the reasons? Well, there are many, so let's start with the first. The first and doubtless most pernicious and retrograde of all is that radical socialism is once again sounding like an appealing idea to millions of people across the world, despite everything that happened during the 20th century. Many younger people, in particular, have embraced an ideology which theory and empirics both show leads to starvation and death, to economic collapse and political totalitarianism. In Britain, Labour is now dominated by people who want to overthrow capitalism and who believe that communism only failed because it was implemented in the wrong way. To the true Corbynite, the humanitarian catastrophe in Venezuela has nothing to do with the confiscation of private property, nothing to do with price controls and the regime socialism, and all to do bizarrely with foreign policy. In America, millennials aged 18 to 29 are now more positive about socialism than they are about capitalism. The shift to the left has been extreme and worrying. I remember growing up in the late 1980s and early 1990s when everybody thought that the contrasting economic and political experience of East and West Germany was the final proof that command economies don't work, and that communism would never be able to recover from such a stark natural experiment. It was the closest thing to proof in the social sciences. One country, two economic models, two radically different outcomes. They and I were wrong. A new generation has arisen which is almost entirely unaware of all of this, and which is unable to accept the failings of command and control. This is a deeply depressing development, and shows that we never learn anything from history, and that we are able to turn a blind eye to anything that conflicts with our priors. Economic lessons, it seems, are forgotten after every generation. The reality is that communism is incompatible with prosperity, with a civilized society, with individual freedom, with family life, with any independent structure that isn't the state. The seminal modern analyst of the economics of communism was Ludwig von Mises, the great Austrian economist. He first revealed his insights at the turn of the century, and he was very well known to Joseph and to all the free marketeers of his generation. His theory was based on a lecture he gave exactly 100 years ago. He explained that abolishing private property and the price system leads to a so-called economic calculation problem. You just can't calculate. The economy simply can't work. Without the knowledge created by entrepreneurs, encapsulated by prices that adjust freely according to supply and demand, all in the context of sound money, it is impossible to know what should be produced and where capital and labour should be allocated. A central planner's job is thus not just difficult, but actually impossible. Even a benign dictator cannot make communism work efficiently. It always leads to total collapse. It's such a great shame that today's modern Corbynites haven't read any of this stuff or haven't learned anything from history. Today, you've got economists in America that continue to refine this kind of economics. It is clear that even in the age of ultra-powerful computers and artificial intelligence, the price system is still required to ensure an efficient and workable economy. We saw what happened in Venezuela with its price controls, theft and high inflation. But the problem is not just that abolishing private property and the price system impoverishes humanity. Every time it has been tried, real socialism has also led to totalitarianism. It's time to read or reread Anna Applebaum's work on the merger of Soviet gulags, and also the Black Book of Communism, which calculates that 94 million people died under communist governance in the 20th century. In China, in the Soviet Union, in Cambodia, in North Korea, Ethiopia, and in many other countries. So communism doesn't work, and the fact that it's becoming fashionable again in this country, in America, is a disaster. Second, going hand in hand with the return of this hardcore socialist ideology, we're also seeing a huge increase in popularity of a softer, albeit still economically debilitating form of socialism. In Britain and in America, we're now witnessing extensive calls for nationalisation, for higher marginal tax rates, for wealth taxes, for much higher inflation, for extreme amounts of regulation. Thomas Piketty's claims about the supposedly inevitable concentration of wealth, all of which, to my mind, have been comprehensively debunked, captured the zeitgeist 5 or 6 years ago. Since then, in America, Emmanuel Zayas and Gabriel Zucman have become the new gurus. They want top income tax rates of 70%, and it's a policy already adopted by Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, America's 29-year-old Democratic poster child. Here the argument has changed, and it's quite interesting. The old left used to argue falsely that entrepreneurs, investors and executives aren't really put off by high tax, which means that rates can be jacked up, raising lots of money to redistribute, without actually discouraging work and investment. The new left has turned the argument on its head. It now admits that the rich, so-called, would work less if they were highly taxed, but claims that this will be a good thing, as it would make society less unequal, shrink the city and Wall Street, and discourage the likes of Jeff Bezos from building new Amazons. Power will be dispersed, and there will be no oligarchies. Despite Brexit, opposed by the elites and hugely powerful interests, the new left is convinced that rich people have captured politics. As Harvard's Greg Mankiw puts it, the left now believes that we can no longer afford the rich. Elizabeth Warren, the Democratic senator, is proposing a 2% annual wealth tax on the rich, and I'll come back to Britain in a second because I think what's happening in America is eventually going to be talked about here too. This 2% tax will be compounded forever and will devastate capital, transforming wealth currently used to fund investment into day-to-day spending. One political strategist crunched numbers. Over a decade, the tax would confiscate 18 to 27% of wealth, and over 50 years, 64 to 82%. And that's before allowing for returns foregone. The impact would be Venezuelan style. It would lead to a collapse in GDP and kill off Silicon Valley. It's madness, yet it has already gone mainstream in the US and is bound to come to Britain soon. Only the richest are being targeted at first, of course, but such taxes always eventually extended to the prosperous middle classes. Ed Miliband was unlucky. His mansion tax failed. But Labour will be back with an even worse version next time. It will surely call for or impose a wealth levy and much higher income, capital gains, inheritance and corporation tax. And this time, tragically, it will have the support of swathes of people who should know better. So that's the second big problem. The third is that the centre-left and centre-right have also moved further away from capitalism. Tony Blair's government, with the benefit of hindsight, was still surprisingly supportive of Thatcherism, though of course Gordon Brown gradually eroded all of that. Today's official Tory policy, and I apologise for all the many Tory MPs and lords in the room today, is undoubtedly to the left economically, apart from immigration to early Blairism. Right? The current policy, I think, is to the left of where Blair was. The reality that there now is a new consensus between centre-left and centre-right, both sides buying into just about every intervention that is ever proposed. I think this would have been especially frustrating for Keith Joseph. His great victory was not just to smash the 1960s and 1970s Butsker-like consensus. Today, their jobs need to be redone once again from scratch. The Tory party is committed to taxes worth 34.3% of GDP, the highest since 1969-1970, 49 years ago, basically. He's also committed to massive interventions in the housing market, via Help to Buy, to huge increases in spending into an unreformed NHS, and to many new regulations or interventions. It is engaged in a race with Labour on various labour product market regulation, supports price controls in energy and more other markets. It no longer believes in the power of genuine rather than artificially enforced competition to bring down prices and keep producers on the toes. It is renationalising rail franchises, though of course that whole corporatist system is rotten. It is rigging every market it comes into contact with, and it still believes in a hyperactive monetary policy as opposed to a more rules-based approach. So that is my third big worry. The centre-left and the centre-right are basically merged when it comes to their approach to economics, and they embrace a kind of mushy social democratic consensus. And the thing that really upset me at the time was when the Tory Treasury's big argument against Brexit was that the tax and regulatory status quo was basically perfect, and that there was no need to deregulate or cut spending or taxes. We live in social democratic utopia, apparently. Well, I don't agree. You might have guessed. A fourth threat to capitalism has also re-emerged, and that is protectionism. It was meant to have been consigned to the dustbins of history, but of course it wasn't. Once again, it has infected parties that used to believe in free trade, including the Republican Party in America. In the UK, some so-called centrist Tories love the EU so much that they're reluctant to attack the customs union's protectionism or to embrace genuine free trade. There has been horror, for example, at the excellent plan to slash 90% of tariffs in the event of a no-deal Brexit. At the same time, paradoxically, some Brexiteers have embraced certain aspects of protectionism, threatening trade wars with the EU to punish it. So more generally, I think the right is embracing a big state in the UK as well as the US. Whether it's a cause or the effect of these four strands of statist ideologies, they have emerged in parallel to the decline in individualism, the old approach. Individual responsibility, the bedrock of capitalism, is increasingly seen as passé. Instead, we have the rise of soft paternalism. We no longer trust individuals and families to take their own decisions. Bad decisions are increasingly outlawed or taxed, and this applies from everything to choosing an energy supplier or buying food in the supermarket. Officials are in control in a way that would have been shocking even in the big government's 1970s. The most extreme cases of this, of course, include the so-called sugar tax, which only affects soft drinks, but the state is extending its control over ever more choices, seeking to mold the public's behaviour in a way that would once have been deemed incompatible with a free society. Others, namely big companies, are blamed for incorrect choices rather than those who actually make them. I'm obviously not defending fraud or corporate dishonesty here, which must rightly be fought fiercely, but this is very different. Individual freedom is no longer seen as a good in of itself. Choice is increasingly deemed to be a burden, not a means of empowering consumers. It started off as an obsession with nudging people to do the right thing. Now it is outright command and control. If you treat people like children, you will end up with an infantilized society that requires ever greater intervention. Again, that's not a good place to be. The rise of anti-capitalist and anti-libertarian ideology isn't merely confined to the pure economic sphere. Marxism, or ideologies loosely based on its methodology and assumptions of oppression, exploitation and class warfare, are now the primary way many well-intentioned people think about many other social issues, including gender, the environment and race. This is deeply regressive and the wrong way to approach genuine problems or injustices. In fact, we are now living through what some have called the third awakening. These neo-Marxist approaches are fusing into a secular left-wing religion. Identity politics are its foundational belief system, the erroneous view that certain physical or sometimes cultural characteristics entirely define us, that our group membership rather than our character or actions is more important than anything else, and that such characteristics are the primary way in which the political system should interact with us. So we become obsessed with categorizing people rather than treating everybody as individuals to be treated as equal in front of the law, regardless of race, religion or gender. This is the wrong way to confront, tackle and eradicate the disgusting scourge that is racism, sexism and religious discrimination. It can actually backfire, as with the far left's embrace of anti-Semitism as a result of their warped hierarchy of oppression, under which only some groups are so-called real victims. You cannot have a classically liberal society without individuals and families being its primary building block. As a result of this rise in identity politics, the old class-based system is dying. Many rich and middle-class people vote for left-wing anti-capitalist parties now, something almost unthinkable in Joseph's days. But instead of the class of society that Sir John Major dreamt of, it is being superseded by the emergence of new cultural and value cleavages. Ideology is back, but in a manner that cuts across the old left and right. Millions vote in a certain way, either because of their own personal characteristics or because they believe in particular non-economic values. Politics as practiced today has become a form of self-positioning, a consumer choice, a form of virtue signalling, a fashion statement, rather than a means to an end, even an indicator of status akin to a luxury good, turbocharged by social media. It also feeds into a need for belonging in an otherwise disrooted post-industrial society. Those who shout the loudest that they aren't nationalists and that they are uber-tolerant actually want to vote for people like us, in quotes, and against people like them, in quotes. Tribalism is back, as is class war, but the groups pitted against each other are now very different, and the levels of hypocrisy is astonishing. This has gone hand in hand with the rise of distrust and hate, and with what was once healthy disagreement or rivalry mutating into all-out loathing. Crucially, opponents no longer believe in the other side's legitimacy. They believe in the politics of personal destruction, that those with whom they disagree must be evil and are impervious to logic and arguments. This is threatening the ability of liberal democracies to function and thus undermining the entire settlement on which our prosperity is based. We are increasingly in a post-rational world. At least the old class-based system was based on an agreement as to the desirability of economic progress. All of this goes hand in hand with the rejection of the idea that politics should be judged on the basis of facts, not linear ideology, or the personal characteristics of the person proffering the opinion. This is one reason why trust is in such decline and why we have so many problems in politics today. As a direct result of this new nastiness eating away at the heart of our society, free speech itself is in steep decline, which is paradoxical given that this is happening at the same time as social media is on the rise. Instead of ushering in a golden age for rational inquiry, the technologies that were meant to liberate us are being used to stifle expression and stamp out dissent. Social media has been a disaster. It is predicated on the anti-rational, the emotional, the knee-jerk, the tribal, and has unleashed armies of liberal, obscurantist warriors dedicated to destroying anybody who doesn't accept accept the consensus or the received wisdom. You can't say that, you must say this. On social media, in universities, and increasingly in every other institution, a battle is raging and liberty is losing. The range of views that can be expressed has narrowed dramatically, partly because we've lost the language and manners required to disagree constructively. Whoever holds a different opinion on Brexit, on social issues, on anything, is dismissed as bonkers, mad, laugh out loud, stupid, and so on and so forth. There's no longer any sense of proportionality, just an all or nothing snap assessment. Just like in the witch hunt of yore, the burden of proof is reversed. You must prove you're not guilty of offending other people's feelings, which is impossible. The strategy for tens of thousands of activists working in digital packs is to bully, shame, and destroy anybody who doesn't agree with them, who dares to express a different opinion, or who fails to signal their virtue in the right way. Ad hominem attacks, when once seen as bad form, are later rationalised using bogus theories. Is that some sort of message? Maybe okay. Nobody is immune from this catastrophic outbreak of nihilism. Everything and everyone is fair game. It's an attempt at imposing digital speech licenses. Those who do not meet the fashionable orthodoxy of the moment have no right to be heard. The aim is to encourage self-censorship. This is all very bad news, and it is endangering the ability of our society to govern itself. The new moral police is much like the old, or at least that which existed during medieval times. They're seeking to enforce a new religion for Western atheists. It is a sickening display. There's good and evil, sacred texts, attempts of cultural marxism most of the time, supporting documents which are generally dubious evidence, priesthood, an original sin, and so on and so forth, and even confessions on Twitter. So free speech is in decline, and that's a really big problem. A corollary to all of this is that the modern left is now more powerful than ever before. Universities and cultural institutions are now completely controlled by the left and their new political weaponry and ideological strictures. They used to only be dominated by it. Now, the proportion of academics and others who are explicitly on the left is much higher than before. There's less balance, less intellectual diversity. As a result of all of this, we have seen a decline of alternative voices. There are no more free market public intellectuals, for example. Who is today's Milton Friedman? Who is today's Hayek? It's not just universities, the same is true of charities, the public sector, and many other crucial aspects and areas of public life. The newest front for the left are even the big corporations. Going hand in hand with the decline in the ideology and the practice of economic freedom, individualism, free inquiry, and free speech, we're witnessing the rise of technocratic imperialism across much of the West. That's another reason why our system's under threat. To some, liberal democracy is seen as laughably inadequate. The death of a belief in democracy, the return of snobbery and the embrace of elite technocratic rule is nothing new. The Fabians were snooty elitists, as was Plato, as were even old-fashioned Tories in the pre-Thatcher past. But the problem is how far this view is now spreading. The idea that the people should decide is laughed at by many educated people. How can we possibly allow the hoi polloi to genuinely influence government policy, given how blinkered they are by definition, because they don't agree with us? In the past, some free marketeers had fallen in the same trap. They quite liked the IMF, which was imposing balanced budgets and no inflation, so why complain about the democratic deficit? Many free marketeers even backed the European project in its early days. In continental Europe, some classical liberals still believe that the continent's money and rule of law is better protected by technocrats in Brussels and Frankfurt. But all of that, I think, has been a major mistake. The technocrats have brought into the collectivist social democratic projects and are running riot. They have been unleashed and been given too much power and don't want to relinquish it. The reality is that unchecked elite rule doesn't work. Somebody needs to guard the guardians. Small nations are good. Cartels of states that prefer harmonization to competition, such as the EU, are bad and must be avoided. This is why I back Brexit. It is a rare, unique chance to defeat the technocrats, an opportunity to build a new polycentric international economic order and to trigger a rebirth of political accountability. One reason for the connection between the demise of libertarian capitalism and real liberal democracy is the failure of the end of history theory. China and Russia ditched communism but have not embraced liberal democracy. Their model is authoritarian state capitalism, a fusion of the best of the free market with the worst of state control. A liberal democratic version of capitalism based upon the sanctity of individual rights, tragically, those no longer represent universal values for all to aspire to. So instead we're seeing this world riven by a new ideological race between versions of authoritarian technocracy. Psychologically, the failure of the end of history theory has been a disaster for supporters of free markets in the West. We're getting the wrong sort of convergence. Instead of every country embracing a Hayekian, Josephian worldview, the temptation instead is for the West to go for one or other variants of technocratic managerialism, as exemplified, of course, by the EU. I still believe free markets, liberal democracies are the best system by far, the most resilient, the most adaptable, the least error-strewn, the system that allows the best correction for mistakes. But it is clear that it doesn't automatically triumph in the short run. To win, we must fight and fight harder. We cannot assume that it will somehow triumph automatically. So what should be done? We need a mix of the old approach and the new approach, of the long term and the short term. It is clear that many of the assumptions that we thought, many of the arguments that we thought we'd won when it comes to communism, when it comes to socialism, social democracy, liberal order, democracy, and all of that stuff, is all now subject to question. The big old arguments are all still the same. Competition is good, not bad. Privatization is good, not bad, and so on. But we also need new language and new arguments relevant to today's society and today's challenges. First and quite simply, we need better leadership. Who's our Keith Joseph? Who's our Margaret Thatcher? Who's our Ronald Reagan? I won't name names, but I'm hoping that a new generation of such people may arise soon and that the opportunity may come. People matter, and we've had the wrong people. It's not just ideas, you actually need people selling those ideas and people implementing those ideas in governments and in government departments. Some defeatists on my side of the argument believe that it's all doomed, that left-wing collectivist economic ideas are hardwired into our psyche, and that Thatcherism was one of the rare moments when public policy went against the grain. But that isn't the point. There's a simple, prosaic explanation for the rise of and return of socialism, and that is simply that the modern mixed economy is failing. We've had the boom, the financial crisis and bust, the slow recovery, stagnant real wages, crazy house prices, terrible trends, and overpriced everything. Everybody can see that. But instead of proposing free market solutions to these problems, Tory politicians have incorrectly agreed with Labour and blamed a non-existent, pure and rampant capitalism for what are invariably government favours. There have been plenty of exceptions, of course, especially on the backbenches, but that, by and large, has been the government's policy, the Tory government's and the coalition government's policies for years now. This must change. A modern pro-capitalist case must be made again, focused on the issues that actually matter, without using abstract concepts or economic theories. Why did nobody make the case, for example, that the financial crisis was largely caused by a combination of over-expansionary monetary policy, government-subsidised risk, and interventions in housing markets, financial regulations that incentivised the wrong sort of behaviours, and central bankers who thought they discovered the key to never-ending growth? Why had nobody devised a workable bankruptcy system for large banks? Yet only the bankers were blamed, faintly damaging capitalism's reputation, even though capitalism wasn't allowed to work properly. Free marketeers must fight the battle of ideas starting from scratch. We need a massive counterattack against socialism. We need to take on the arguments of the Corbyns and the AOCs in America. There must be no apologies, no concessions to wealth taxes, no 1970s style triangulations by Tory establishment types predicated on the belief that the left's final victory is inevitable and that the best that can be done is to delay it. No, that is nonsense and unacceptable. A wealth tax to return all property into leaseholds, reverting to the state after a few years. Mass renationalisations will rob us of the choices we now all take for granted and turn us all into supplicants. A bigger state would ruin the country and cripple growth. There needs to be a renewed campaign explaining why privatised companies are better than state-owned ones and the rest. But this high-level, economically, slightly theoretical campaign is only a necessary but not sufficient condition for the fight back. We also need consumer language and a retail offer. Crucially, the fight back must take the moral high ground and make the moral, not just utilitarian, case for capitalism. The bailouts after the financial crisis were a key cause of the shift leftwards in opinion for a simple reason. Until then, the deal was that we lived in a society where gains and losses were both privatised. The public bought this, they knew that people could become very rich if they took the right decisions, but also that they could go bust if things went wrong. One could win as well as lose capital. The financial crisis partly unfairly shifted that perception. The view was that the rich, the elites, were on a one-way journey towards wealth, that they would always be rescued, and that only the low middle classes or the poor ever suffered any downsides. Losses were socialised, profits remained privatised. This was only half true, of course, but nevertheless, it was a cultural catastrophe for capitalism akin to the Great Depression of the 1930s. You cannot make a coherent case for capitalism when the state is subsidising big business. All of this must end. We need to ditch HS2, all direct handouts to companies, industrial policies, and pledge that there will be no more bailouts then. Equally, you cannot win the battle when money is deliberately underpriced, when savings are deliberately undervalued, when debt is deliberately encouraged. The state needs to be neutral in monetary policy and stop using it as a tool for permanent expansion. It is equally impossible to make a moral case for capitalism without explaining relentlessly how to help the poor and the have-nots, not just the better off. It's not just about cheaper prices and better products, though that is key. It's also about spreading opportunities at a time when the premium in certain skills keeps going up and weak productivity growth is depressing wages. Education needs to be at the heart of all of this. Schools, training and universities have been one of the greatest failures of the public sector. The biggest single reason for poor social mobility and a plethora of other problems. Michael Gove's reforms have done a lot of good, but much more needs to be done. We need even more supply-side change, even more competition. We should start discussing Lord Joseph's idea for school vouchers yet again. I'm also excited by James Tooley's attempts at launching a chain of ultra-cheap private schools that far from reform. We need an entirely new system of student loans. Universities should raise and lend money to students, in effect taking equity in students' future stream of earnings, drastically improving the incentive structure and making it more attractive to poorer children. Last but not least, we need a drastic change of focus towards a new proper system of technical education and apprenticeships. A related point is that in recent years, the case for free markets has often seemed to have been aimed solely at the so-called anywheres. Yet the somewheres need to be targeted just as much. It is simply not true that capitalism inevitably dissolves bonds. It is vital that free marketeers talk to people with conservative values again, not just those with metropolitan liberal ones. A much greater emphasis on welfare as a hands-up, not a hands-out, combined with better market-driven technical education will certainly help. David Cameron's Big Society was the right idea, poorly executed and abandoned too soon. Supporters of a much smaller state want a much stronger set of non-state institutions. They should talk about these as much as they make the case for commerce and entrepreneurship. The case for capitalism must be inclusive. It needs to appeal to minorities just as much as to everybody else. Supporters of free markets must remind their audience of the wisdom of the great Martin Luther King, one of the heroes of the 20th century. I have a dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the colour of their skin, but by the content of their character. That should be at the heart of any new vision for a reborn 21st century capitalism. A modern meritocratic pro-capitalist movement must be seen as a key part of the coalition dedicated to fighting racial, sexual and religious prejudice. When aimed at the general public, the new campaign for capitalism must emphasise bread and butter issues rather than abstract concepts such as including choice or competition. The public is used to choice and no longer sees that as an advantage. In fact, it sometimes sees it as a disadvantage. Instead, campaigners must start talking about low prices again. It's quite simple, but it's effective. In energy policy, in transport policy, when it comes to childcare, and of course when it comes to housing, government regulation and taxes are the primary reason keeping prices up. deregulate, and prices will fall. Many young people are left-wing because they feel they can't acquire property, rather than because they don't believe in property anymore. Again, this is partly about low prices, but the strategy here must be to focus on the ownership society, a property-owning democracy. The rate of home ownership is now down from about 70% to 63%, lower than in France and lower than the EU. That has to change. We need to build new residential communities of the kind that people want to actually live in and spreading, and we also need to spread shared ownership. The answer to all of that are free market policies. We free marketeers preach that markets mean greater consumer choice, lower prices and better quality, but when you look at the housing market, the public look at what they see exorbitant prices, massive increases in costs, low quality, dubious estate agents and so on, and they wonder what we're talking about and they no longer trust anything we say. I think the calamity that's been the housing market has been the single biggest reason for declining trust in capitalism. It's unfair, it wasn't caused by a real failure of the market, but that's what the people and the public believe. It's a simple equation: millions of new suburban homes plus millions of new suburban homeowners equals much greater support for the free market and also the Conservative Party. We also need to bolster auto-enrolment to improve pension savings and extend this system to paying for social care and other forms of insurance. We also need an explicit target for a smaller state and lower taxes. In 2012, I chaired the 2020 Tax Commission. We published a lengthy tome that I'm sure no one read, entitled The Single Income Tax. The title of the commission, it turns out, 2020, was absurdly optimistic. So you probably need another 2030 Tax Commission now. But I think that the main findings remain the same. We call for abolishing 8 taxes and the creation of just one, a single income tax, taxing income from labour and capital at a flat, lowish rate. We also recommended that taxes be slashed to 33% of GDP, marginal tax rates should not exceed 30% of GDP, and lots of things like income tax merging with national insurance, corporation tax and capital gains tax being replaced with a single tax on capital income, dividends, interest and rent at a rate of 30%, stamp duty and inheritance tax being abolished. Part of this was to massively simplify the system. Part of it, again, was to make a moral argument. Another big reason why there's been a decline in support for capitalism is this view that some people pay taxes and other people don't pay taxes. You need a system that's very clear, very simple, and which treats all kinds of income equally, but at the same time is pro-growth. So you need a free market, pro-capitalist tax reform, not a left-wing. Next, and here I'm continuing to be controversial, I'm sure, comes the NHS. It's at the heart of the modern British identity, but it's not working very well. And it's less efficient, we need to admit, than systems in other countries which allow more competition and more private sector involvement. The reality is, unless that taboo is tackled, not by politicians, but by think tanks and others in the first place, unless there's a major long-term campaign to try and find ways of reforming the NHS to make it more like the system in the Netherlands or Germany or Switzerland or Singapore, we are in deep trouble because the NHS is going to gobble up more and more and more taxes as a share of GDP, and there'll be constant upwards pressure to increase taxes, and that will be disastrous for Conservatives and for capitalism. Right? We're already paying taxes at a 39 or 49-year high. It can't go much further. So I'm nearly done in my long list. You'd be very happy to hear. But I do think that we need to talk about Brexit, because I think it's a necessary part of this agenda for reborn capitalism and a rejuvenated free society. The reason for that is you need accountability, and you need a system that rejuvenates our traditional democratic institutions. I also think we need real decentralisation within the UK, perhaps a new UK-wide federalism, with the UK Parliament in charge only of certain things like managing financial policy and foreign affairs, and much greater decentralisation to other parts of the UK, new structures. So, I'm almost at the end of my long list of reforms, but I think that above all we must start asking the right questions. What are the circumstances that are necessary to ensure that capitalism and a free society can thrive and survive for more than just the present? What are the institutions that are required? What culture, what attitudes? How does one reinforce civil society and Burke's civil platoons? How does one maintain liberty? I'm liberal on immigration, but it is clear that such liberalism only works if it is also accompanied by a British Dream-style vision that migrants must sign up to, with integration but not assimilation required. The reason a free society is only possible within a national political context, and that is an issue that we will need to accept. So what is the answer? The answer is a new campaign for capitalism that highlights all of the old arguments, but finds new language and addresses all of the current issues that have driven so many people against the system, but that provides free market, pro-liberty solutions to these public policy issues rather than the usual lazy social democratic answers. Thank you.
Thank you, Allister. That was magnificent. Sadly, having walked here from the House of Commons, I couldn't help but reflect how rare it is that we hear any of those arguments here in the House of Commons today. And I've often thought over the years, we look at some of the ground that we seem to have ceded to the left. Very often it's because we simply haven't bothered to make the arguments, and eventually reached the point where far too many politicians in the Conservative Party maybe haven't even heard the arguments themselves. But this evening we have the campaign for capitalism started here. It was marvellous. Thank you very much, Allister. And we've got time for some questions. Good. Anybody want to?
Yes, one of the things that I thought my life was in. One of the things Keith Joseph did in the 1970s, of course, was to tour around universities giving the case for freedom and free enterprise. And it was a brave thing for him to have done because there was no platforming, and I don't think he was particularly sort of one of these up for a ruck, sort of aggressive type people, but he obviously believed sufficiently strongly that he would put up with some intimidation to actually go around touring universities and doing that. Is that something that that we need to do again, and not just perhaps the universities, but with the schools as well? Maybe when people got to university, they're too far gone with some of these hostile messages about capitalism that are being inculcated.
Yes, I mean, absolutely, all of this sort of stuff needs to happen again. I think it was quite bad for Keith Joseph in the 70s, but it'd be much worse today because universities have shifted considerably more to the left since then. It's not just the students, but it's the structures. In fact, the students are not necessarily the structures of the universities have become captured by the left quite clearly. But I think the campaign has to be much broader than just that. It has to be about finding new messages and talk about the issues that people are concerned about. What are people concerned about? They're concerned about housing, they're concerned about trades, they're concerned about roads, they're concerned about all those sorts of issues. And those are the issues that always need to be addressed using alternative arguments, because at the moment the answer to everything is always more money, more government intervention, more money, more government intervention. And in fact we need to find free market solutions for all of these problems.
I know quite a lot of you, but I should have said, please say who you are and where you're from.
One thing you haven't mentioned in your talk is some of the most effective anti-free market critique and anti-globalization critique has actually come from the far right. People like Viktor Orban, Hungary, Steve Bannon, not to mention Donald Trump. They are ultra-nationalists, they're protectionists, they're xenophobic, and it's very surprising. Yes, Jeremy Corbyn is a threat to free market, but if you look into the West as a whole, Viktor Orban is as a great threat. Do you have any views on that?
Yes, it's clear that the loss of trust in the system is leading to rising extremes, and populists of left and populists of right, and both populists of left and populists of right excuse me, dislike capitalism, dislike free trade, dislike liberalism, and that's the challenge that we face. But ultimately, I think Western countries need to re-engineer their democratic institutions, they need to salvage their democratic institutions. I think that's key, because then they can show that there's a way of making free market capitalism and liberal democracy work. The problem at the moment is, in the case of the UK, so much power has been given away to the EU, you've got all sorts of problems, too much centralisation, a gulf between MPs and the public and all those sorts of things. These need to be rectified. Countries, one of the reasons, there's many reasons why about Brexit, but one of the reasons I think, if it actually happens, and if we Brexit the right way, we'll be able to show the rest of the world that you can be a successful, modern, liberal, outward-looking, free market, free trading country, and that you don't have to go down the road of some of these left-wing or right-wing nationalists, basically.
Just as an aside, I'm sure everybody remembers the attacks that the Conservative Party had from the BBC and others when we were leaving the European People's Party and forming a new group in the European Parliament. Now you hear the BBC describing Fidesz, Viktor Orban's party, as extreme right, but they don't say how right we were to the EPP.
Is this where? I will shout.
Sorry.
Back, gone. Andrew Knight, I'm a trustee of the CPS. Can you think of, have you thought about finding a new term of art to replace the word capitalism? It is such a swear word now that undoing it means you've got to undo something which is so deeply negative. I'm just wondering whether we couldn't think that. Actually, if Heath were here, he would actually be thinking about that kind of thing because he was so intellectually inventive. And I'm just wondering, have you thought about it at all?
I've tried to think about it and I've failed. So I've got nowhere. Also, I'm quite countercultural. I quite like the fact that the word capitalism winds some people up. But I'm being slightly facetious, obviously. You're right. If it were possible to find a word, I mean that's why sometimes I talk about the free society or those kinds of words. But basically, you're right, and I don't have an answer. But despite that, I think nevertheless that we can fight for these ideas, and that there's no time to be lost. So there you go.
I think there is an answer. It's one simple word: ownership. Franco prevented major upheavals in Spain because his housing policy was to let people buy their houses on very, very cheap mortgages, where we went for council houses. It took Margaret Thatcher to reverse that. It is, people love and feel the security of ownership. So I think round that word we can continue and should have built and can build much more.
Yes. Yes. I mean, clearly an ownership society is at the heart of all of this. You need an ownership society if you want to preserve our society, basically. If you want to, if home ownership falls under 5 percentage points, someone like Corbyn will become Prime Minister, right? And I think it's a tragedy that home ownership has fallen so much. I think the main reason for that is lack of house building, and I think it's urgent that far more homes are built. The numbers have started to move in the right direction, but what people really want are new suburbs, and they want those sorts of things, and the current system is not actually delivering. The current system is starting to deliver a few more units, as they call it, but it's not actually delivering the sorts of things people actually want. The last time we had a massive house building boom of the sort that people actually wanted was in the 1930s, when the price of housing collapsed and you could buy a house in 2.5 years income if you were a skilled manual worker in London, and there was a massive increase in home ownership and huge new districts and areas were built, metro land and all that sort of stuff. This is the sort of thing we need to do, and I think it's urgent.
Gentlemen.
Richard Hamilton, member of supporter of the CPS. You talked about that, building on the point about ownership, don't you think we need to learn some lessons of what hasn't worked? Because you say that free markets provide all the solutions, but those of us that believe in the agenda of Mrs. Thatcher and Keith Joseph need to accept that things like water and electricity, things that were done at the very tail end of the Thatcher administration, you talk about having ideas, selling them and implementing them. We've replaced them with crypto nationalisation with massive regulatory bodies, and they're owned by nationalised companies in other European countries. We're dependent on the French for nuclear. I don't know how we're going to manage on electricity, and we've seen the consequences for water. So do you think that we need to come up with other solutions rather than saying that everything has to do it? Because I think at the margin, that's where the public trust is lost, not actually on the broad thrust of your argument.
I think it's clearly a mistake to privatise companies and then allow state-owned companies to buy them. I don't see the point of that really. And clearly a lot of those things are mismanaged. But I don't think that energy or water should be provided by the state. I think it can be provided by the private sector. And I think there can be quite a lot more competition in those areas. But I do think that the way those industries or areas have gone, the system's been completely distorted and the whole policy process has gone badly wrong, and clearly that hasn't helped. But I don't think it's necessarily water. I mean, for example, with water companies, it is crazy clearly that there are water shortages still, 20 or 30 years after privatisation. Those sorts of things should have been part of the contract when these companies were sold. But I don't think that they should be re-nationalised.
I'm worrying in favour of the right-hand side of the room, but I've got 3 more over here. One here.
You were somebody asked about the replacement work of capitalism. Sir Keith, I knew Sir Keith Joseph in 1970. I knew Sir Keith Joseph in 1975. And he had a replacement expression. It was called freedom of the individual. And that was what it was all about.
Yes, I mean, obviously I find that very appealing. The problem is, I find, is that a lot of younger generation Corbynites don't think that their vision is incompatible with freedom. Strangely, they think that you can nationalise all of industry and have 70 or 90% marginal tax rates, and that you still have the freedom of the individual. Our problem is that we need to remind them that those policies will lead to reduction in freedom. That's how bad things have become, I'm afraid.
Allister, Tony Lodge, further to your hope for a real Brexit, which I share, is not the opportunity of a real Brexit that we actually are able to focus people's minds again. A real Brexit means we won't have European Union state aid legislation, which actually has protected us from some of the excesses of the Labour Party in the past. With all of this gone, we will then have to face what the left can genuinely implement again in Britain. Could that not focus what has so far been failing Conservative policies?
Yes, I mean, clearly, if you become responsible for your own actions again, after years of being only partly responsible for them, that forces you to focus, and that there will, Brexit could change the entire national conversation. I'm talking the conditional because I have no idea whether we'll actually leave the EU or not. I just hope so.
George.
George Trafgon, CPS author. Alistair, like a lot of people, I agree with most of what you said, but it's always important to provoke the bourgeois every now and again. I personally think there's no point having a campaign for capitalism unless you're going to start thinking seriously about reforming capitalism, understanding the consumer issues that Corbyn is articulating. The way the utilities were privatised and then these overseas banks, etc., took control of them and cut the capital expenditure and raise the prices, to understand how the monopolies work, to understand the restrictions on housing, the student loan system. You might even argue we should have a sovereign wealth fund. I'd be personally in favour of that. But unless we really listen to what people are saying, they're not stupid. They feel these things for a reason. And we need to respond. And I'm personally just changing the language and having a campaign. It's all very well, but I think everybody needs to think really hard about what needs to change, and not just change the language.
Yes, I agree with almost all of that. For example, housing, I've discussed, the student loan system should be replaced by a completely new system of financing versus my favourite would be that universities lend money to students and in fact take a stake in their future earnings. things like, it makes no sense to have privatised monopolies. You need to fight monopolies, you need to have competition, which is always the original intent of the privatisation of the utility companies in the past. It makes no sense to allow state-owned companies from other countries to simply buy privatised companies here, because then they're still owned by state-owned companies. There's no difference, basically. So all these things I agree with. But I think you can, I still think that's compatible with, and I think that is about free markets, not about anything else really. So I do, I think there's about 20 issues that the public cares about, and all 20 can be addressed using new policies. And it's all about reducing prices, improving the quality of services, and so on and so forth.
But also, just to add to that, I personally think that free, proper functioning markets are underpinned by strong institutions and proper regulation. And too often we've forgotten that. And that quite often means standing up to capitalists, because they will take too much out of the system relative to consumers. And I think the way the railway has been dealt with is a very good example.
The railways,
the campaign for capitalism has got to have reforms.
Yeah, but the railways are a disaster, but don't forget that the most is state-owned already, right? All the rail infrastructure was nationalised years ago.
Last question.
John, during my career, I've been involved with a lot of international financial transactions. I have not always liked what I've seen of the way in which capitalists, in quotation marks, behaved. I thought at the time, and now becoming increasingly obvious, that what we've got to do now is to take steps to proceed to rooting out the bad capitalists, bad monopolistic practices, the ways in which people rip off the system, and leave the work to the good free market entrepreneurs who look after us.
I have no problem with that. Clearly, you need to punish bad people, or anyone who breaks the law, anybody who defrauds other people. That's very important. But I think generally speaking, governments want to do that. I think what's different about what I'm talking about is that, what I'm talking about is re-injecting this elements of competition and incentives, and a new way of doing things in all sorts of other areas that have effectively become cartelised and corporatised. And I think that's where the big gains are to be had, and I think that's the bit of the picture that few people are talking about at the moment.
Thank you very much, Allister. A few thank yous, really. Thank you to all of you for coming to the Keith Joseph Memorial Lecture, especially the family. It's wonderful that you come every year to this event, and that we have kept some of the ideas that Keith championed alive. And I hope we will do so with greater success in the future. Many thanks to Lord Vincent for kindly sponsoring this occasion, and without which we would have found it difficult to be doing. But thanks most of all, Allister, to you for a magnificent Keith Joseph Memorial Lecture. I think it gives us hope that there are people who are putting forward these ideas, who are campaigning for these ideas, and especially when they are occupying the editor's chair in one for his speaking as well. So thank you so much.